We are pleased to have you joining us once again for an episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So, Gary and I have been sitting at this table for the last 20 or so minutes talking about a lot of different possibilities for subject matter for today. And I think we landed on place. And as I have been thinking about it, and as Gary has been explaining some of the things that have been impacting his work as of late, I do think this is a timely topic to just discuss for us all as a community to really think through what is our place, how do we define our place, and what are we doing to improve our place?
hmm Yeah, and place being your community,
Mm-hmm.
and generally when we think or when I think about place, it's in a community, but it can be your neighborhood, it can be your own house,
Mm-hmm.
it could be your state, it could be your country,
Right.
it could be the world if you think about our place in the universe,
Sure.
right? But I think in general terms, when I'm thinking place, I'm thinking community.
When you and I were just kind of passing some ideas back and forth, you said something about you believed that COVID really shifted our perception of place, and I think that bears a little bit of explanation, or needs a little bit of explanation as we launch into this conversation, because I do agree with you. Prior to COVID, I think we were more communal minded than post COVID. COVID by default drove us inside and brought about a fear of exposure to other people.
hmm
We were having groceries delivered, we
hmm
were limiting any type of contact with the outside world. And so our place, our home, became this safe haven from which we operated. And we began to work, we began to do school, we began to do all kinds of things through technology, substituting a face to face interaction with a screen. And our place really shrunk during
hmm
COVID. And my assessment, 6 years later from, the onset of our shutdown, is that we haven't really expanded all that much while folks are out enjoying movies and going out to dinner and going to stadiums and watching sporting events, which wouldn't have happened 6 years ago. If you were to really analyze where you feel safe and secure and in control, it probably comes back down to your home or your at least very close sphere of influence. And are we anymore thinking about the greater community as a place where we live and contribute?
Yeah, you've described my safe bubble,
Mm,
my very close family and friends, and um, I think COVID taught us that that bubble was something that we should maintain,
mm,
and I think we came out of it thinking that maybe that's a good way to move forward, subconsciously or consciously.
mm.
And and I think this would be a really good study for folks to do. I would say there's a little bit of a dichotomy though, because inside my bubble I had my screens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like I'm reinforcing what you said. I think that we have forgotten the community in which we live in two ways. One, we have collapsed our bubble down to a very small size that includes that safe place that only has my family and closest friends and social media
Mm,
and whatever news I get. News came from the old what's happening north, east, west, and south. And the way we get our news, I think, changed.
mm-hmm.
I think it used to be more in the coffee shop and the barber shop and
Sure.
the
The water
grocery
cooler.
store, the water cooler.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became isolated. Along with my bubble came my screen that then screened the way I get my news and information.
Mm-hmm.
So, ironically, the community was super left out because not only did I collapse within my little bubble, which let's just call it my house, but then I took with me into my bubble the national scene, in the international scene, in the way I received my news and information,
Mhm.
which meant that I didn't need to get it from the grocery store or the barber. And whenever I did start venturing out again, I found out that the people who didn't get news and information the way I did, I didn't much want to associate with them
Mhm.
anyway. So I think we had a double whammy. I'm now thinking out loud,
Yeah.
a double whammy on community.
Yeah. I think what triggered this thought process for me was an exposure to an article yesterday. So, Gary and I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is the most highly populated city within the whole state. And there is a community that at one time was thriving around a body of water, Elephant Butte Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And it is down, I read yesterday, I think, to 1.5% capacity. The water is so low that they're closing boat ramps. And I began to think about what is going to happen to that community because in the early days when it was formed, it was designed around that notion of tourism and watercraft and water play and vacation rentals. And if there's no water, you just have a giant hole in the ground with 100-degree summer temperatures. And that is not much of a draw.
No.
And so the notion of community and doing what is necessary for the vibrancy and the well being of the community, something happened, something went awry.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean this literally and figuratively. What has happened upstream?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the water?
Mm-hmm.
What happened with the planning? And so I don't want to dilute this conversation too much, but I think there is a real power in us being curious about where do we think our place is and are we contributing to the greater place instead of just our own home bubble?
My place used to include Elephant Butte. When we bought a boat from a friend, quite by accident, we had a friend who had a child who had some heart issues and had to literally sell everything that they could just to for her medical care. This was, gosh, 20 years ago or more. And and so a friend of mine got together and bought this boat from this person to help them out. And we became co-owners in this boat. And then he eventually gifted the boat to another one of my family members, my son, for his wedding. And so anyway, it became our family boat. We trailered it everywhere at first, and we went to Conscience and we went up to Navajo Lake, but the kids loved Elephant Butte. They loved it for the warm water. They loved it for the restaurants that we figured out. They loved it that you could take the boat right up on the beach. We would launch it once at the beginning of the weekend, and then we would find a cove. Somebody would drive. One person drives the boat. One person drives the car. We would meet at a cove, and you could just anchor the boat right there. That's unique. You can't do that at Navajo, for instance. And there was also this magical thing called the burger barge
Mm.
that would move every once in a while. And it was, there's something about having a burger outside anyway, but on a lake. Anyway, I'm describing to you this magical time that we all remember. And so Elephant Butte was part of my place.
Mm.
I would have considered that part of my place.
Mhm.
When the kids all moved away and we stopped going to the lake, I eventually sold the boat. So it's no longer my place. So when you told me about the article you read yesterday, I just felt so sad for that community because,
Mhm.
my goodness, the people who run Casa Taco and all my favorite haunts down there, the Burger Barge, etc., probably have very little to do right now. So my heart goes out for them. Um, but I wasn't watching the gradual decline. I'm sure it didn't empty out overnight because it's no longer part of my place.
Mhm. So, is COVID an accelerant on losing connection to place?
Holy, yes,
Right?
absolutely. I mean, I think it was like putting Miracle Grow on a lack of understanding and being in and out in our community.
So then, my first curious question, if we're agreeing that that was the case, what do we do? How do we begin to restore a greater sense of place? how do we stop thinking so tiny and protecting our own and considering how our greater place and our voice, our influence, our impact within that greater space benefits others and not just ourselves?
Yeah. It's a really good set of questions to ask because, well, I guess the first question to ask is community important?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is. And I think most people would agree that it's good for us to band together on certain items. I mean, we used to all, if somebody's barn burned down, we'd all get together and help that person raise it in the community, you know? I don't know that we do that as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like you said, COVID accelerated that. But boy, I tell you, you can expand your place. There's
Mm-hmm.
ways to expand it. My wife Andrea and I go for a walk every day in the park. We see many of our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Randall, who's just up the street, is in a band, and that actually expands our place a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because we'll sometimes go and watch him perform over at one of the breweries. And so um, I think it's important that we expand our place. I think a shrinking place is not as healthy as an expanding place.
Mm.
I'll put that statement out there and see how you react.
Yeah. I like that notion about being able to expand your place just through casual relationship and choosing to nurture it in some small way,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if your place is your home plus the neighborhood park, and you have some regulars that you encounter at that neighborhood park, and that causes you then to go visit them as they perform at a brewery, or maybe you go taste something that they have cooked at the restaurant they own, etc. It does expand your place simply by walking out your front door.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of value to that. And so, in a way, I guess then I would ask, would you have a lot more care about something going on at the park outside of your house than what's going on at Elephant Butte Lake? I would think by default, yes, you would. So if somebody were to make a decision like we're gonna pull out the grass in half the park and we're gonna build whatever,
Yeah,
I think you'd have some strong feelings about
I
it,
would.
and it would impact your sense of place
Mm-hmm.
and the people within it.
Absolutely. And I think that, so I think, I, I think we need to be intentional about our space. And I think a very good, curious question is, how big do I want my place to be? How much can I give to my place? And what am I expecting from my place?
In
And
return.
in return, and or in relationship, in resources, in um, joy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're very blessed that at the end of this park is Mountain Run Shopping Center, and I can go there, and we often do go walk and get our groceries.
Mm-hmm.
That's a blessing. That we don't live in a food desert where, or a place where I've got to get in the car and run to Costco
Mm-hmm.
to get food. There's also a beautiful little French restaurant in there. There's also, Cinnamon Cafe. There's a there's a coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
Mykonos. No, Mykonos. No. But the point is, I can walk to those places if I choose to.
Mm-hmm.
If I choose to just get in my car and have a destination from here to there, and then survive out there with people I don't know, and then come home, I feel like I'm ever shrinking my place. If I'm walking around at least and doing that, and there's other techniques, there's other
Sure.
things to do, but I think one thing to think about and talk about is, what is my place and what do I consider my place, and how am I nurturing my place?
Mm-hmm. I think of an expression that I hear repeated in movies depicting a certain period of time. I've never had this said directly to me, but I've heard it in many a movie about know your place,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's a threat.
Yes.
It's for somebody thinking too highly of themselves,
Yes.
or somebody believing, they have rights or privileges that maybe someone else doesn't believe them to have. But
Interesting.
as I'm thinking about that statement, know your place, I think there is value, not in that condemning way of you are regulated to this certain, you know, construct, but rather know what you do consider your place and know what your impact is in it. To your point about the park and the access to food and all of those things, you live in a beautiful place where there is a lot of privilege and opportunity.
Hmm.
And if somebody were to come and threaten that, you would have feelings and likely actions around that. And
Hmm.
so if we allow ourselves to widen the view from our little home territory, our little nest, our safe bubble, expand that ever growing outward and considering the well being of our surrounding community, I think it is beneficial on so many levels. And, part of this conversation came up around data centers
Hmm.
for you and people fighting against what they believe to be an invasion of place, right? And so thinking again about some of the choices that get made, both upstream and downstream consequences, because I know that sounds funny to say about an upstream consequence, but what I mean by that is the decisions that are being made kind of in that upstream manner may form regulations and rules that impact downstream productivity, safety, all of those things. But because of the distance and the time between the two, there may be really unintended consequences from well meaning upstream actions to the downstream output.
And effects. And unintended consequences is a big part of being careful about how you manage your place.
Yeah.
I think we should constantly be questioning ourselves about how we're managing our place,
Mm.
what guardrails we're putting up around it, and what rules we think are helping protect us from either change or positive or negative things that could occur. And so what you're talking about can sometimes be, well, a characterization that came to mind when you were talking is place is not only a physical place in geography, it can also be a place in time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a place in time, and especially if I'm making decisions now, it's going to affect downstream
Mm-hmm.
using your language. Upstream things that happened before are now affecting my current place,
Mm-hmm.
and things that I decide now will affect my future.
Yes.
And so being intentional around that is also very important.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a little video that I saw a few days ago by someone who, has a considerable following. There had been infidelity within the marriage. This woman had been betrayed, and she was in a particular state where she was trying to file for divorce. And the upstream people and decisions who, at the time, wanted women to know their place,
Hmm.
made rules and regulations that you had to wait a full year or had to go through a full year of separation before a legal divorce would be granted, thinking that maybe that was enough time for reconciliation.
Reconciliation. Hmm.
However, that upstream decision did not count for abuse,
Hmm.
neglect.
Hmm.
If you've got an absent partner and you can't afford groceries or insurance and the things that would need to be filed for with the divorce in order to qualify, all of these upstream decisions with people thinking they knew where someone else's place was impacting things now. And so I find this to be a fascinating conversation to kind of think about in time and location.
I think this is, I was with a state representative this morning, and we were discussing things like data centers. And I was making the statement that place was so important that you should not, if you're a data center developer, you shouldn't be going for approvals. You should be going for acceptance. And acceptance means that you've actually listened and talked, and we've talked about the situation of that place,
Mm-hmm.
and that you are an adder and somebody who can be leave a legacy and leave things better in any place, which is a nice, I think that's a good rule for life, is
Hmm.
to leave any place that you are better than when you came, if it's going to be a temporary or transient for sure. But to that point is when we are making even well intended rules and regulations and laws, we sometimes have to, I think, look at those downstream, a quarter or a couple of quarters or a couple of years at least, and say, is this having the intended consequences for the people who are being affected?
Hmm.
So that comes back to the definition of place. In that situation, it's people who are in a place in their relationship, in their marriage, in their, whatever legal
Hmm.
contract that they have done. And so I think that we've expanded the definition of place now
Hmm.
from a physical geographic location to a place in time and to a place on a regulatory or contractual continuum.
Hmm.
There are many ways to think about place, and they're all very important. And how intentional are we about our place now, our place that it's going to look like in the future, and what are we doing to nurture and make it a better place?
Hmm. So, as we kind of bring this home, I always want to leave everyone with some thoughts that they can incorporate into their own circumstances as they're asking curious questions about the place that they find themselves, right? So, first off, you had brought up the question about how do you identify your place? And
Mm-hmm.
is it just your home? Is it your neighborhood, your community, your work, your space and time, on the spectrum of influence, whatever. How are you defining your place? And are you aware of your influence within that
Mm-hmm.
place? Right? I think that's a great question to kind of kick around a little bit. And are you having the influence you want to be having in that place? And if not, then what?
Yeah, why not? And how can you improve that? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that what we've done with the invention of the automobile is extend our place. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got a home place, a work place,
Yep.
a shopping place,
Place of worship.
so
Yeah.
and a place of worship.
Mm-hmm.
Good, good. And so we those that combined together, if you just kind of scrunch out the commute, is our place,
Mm-hmm.
right? So are we shrinking our place? Are we expanding our place? Should we be expanding our
Mm-hmm.
place? Who should we be considering part of our place? And what relationships and what organizations and things like that? And I, I tend to think that we should all be thinking about how could we expand our place, our own personal place, to make other people's places better if we can.
I think that's well said. Lots of things to think about as we leave you for this episode of Curiosity and as always, appreciate you listening in. And until next time, we'll wish you well and hope that you do stay curious about the situation you find yourself in and continue to ask.
And take care.